All right. Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Social Critic. My name is Sohail Shawkeri, and today we have a very special guest with us. We have Mr. Marshall Lefferts, and I'm very excited and honored to have him with us today. We're going to be talking about a number of exciting and cutting-edge topics in the fields of cosmology, geometry, just new era consciousness related topics that I'm just really excited to talk about because I feel like Marshall is at the cutting edge on topics that can really take our society and our civilization forward into greater cooperation and harmony, both within ourselves and within the universe as a whole. Marshall, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Sohail, for having me today. And I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's exactly where we're at and what we need to do.
Fantastic. Great. Well, let me just, for our audience, just give you a little bit of background on Marshall, and then we'll jump right into our conversation. Marshall Lefferts is founder and director of the Cosmometry project, board member of the Resonance Science Foundation. He was also president from 2006 to 2019 of the same Resonance Science Foundation, and he's been an adjunct faculty of the Resonance Academy, as well as associate producer of Thrive, What on Earth Will It Take? And visual effects co-director of Thrive 2, which was just released on September 26th. And I highly, highly recommend everyone to watch this amazing film. Marshall is also a lifetime member of the Buckminster Fuller Institute and Chapel of Sacred Mirrors. So, wow. Thank you so much again, Marshall. And what a fascinating and insightful and just, I mean, a great background. I'd love for you to tell us more about your background. I mean, I think probably a great place to start is, I know that the film Thrive 2 just came out. And as I mentioned, you guys, if you haven't seen this film, it's really a must watch because it's something that is very solutions focused to our civilizational problems, basically our existential problems as a society, a civilization. And it's because a lot of times for those of us who are in the know to some extent about some of the different ills that are permeating society, we tend to focus a lot on what's wrong. And what I love about this film is that it acknowledges what's wrong, it recognizes it, because that's important to bring into our awareness, but it spends most of the time focused on building new solutions and creating a new way of being, a new perspective, and just a new way of handling different solutions or handling different situations that arise in an efficient and a cooperative and harmonious manner. And so I loved the film. Thank you so much for being a part of it. And I was wondering if you could just walk us through, Marshall. So how did you come to be involved in all this great work with the Thrive films and being president of the Resonance Science Foundation, which is Nassim Haramein's organization, and just can you just walk us through how you have gotten to this point?
How did I end up here?
Yes.
It's a long story that goes back starting 42 years ago, actually.
Wow.
Yeah, and which is when I had a what I call a spontaneous awakening experience when in my first year of college, uh, and that just set me into a state of awareness that I knew something was different than the reality I was in that time. Um, and um, a number of seminal things happened kind of right at that time. One is I studied Aikido, which taught me about the key energy, the fact that we're energetic beings, is that we have this toroidal field dynamic in as our aura, and that our whole kind of relationship to energy is in that spiraling vortex motion.
Oh, wow. So that was taught in Aikido. Aikido.
It was. Aikido is totally about spiraling and moving and harmonizing. Actually, the word Aikido means to harmonize with the life force energy, the practice of harmonizing. And Aikido is all about, the principle of Aikido is to restore harmony in the universe. So as a martial art, it's really in a high level of purity in that regard.
Beautiful.
And it's quite profound. And then I also, a few months after that happened, decided to read a book, and I was in my parents' library and found this book called Intuition by Buckminster Fuller. And
wow.
That was like, that's interesting. And I pulled it off the shelf, started reading it, and it was just, it just blew my mind open, gave me perspective on why I was really not into school, why I wasn't into the traditional academia, and just gave me a perspective that, as Bucky calls it, is comprehensive. He called himself a comprehensivist rather than a specialist. And so I basically adopted that viewpoint from that early time. I actually got to meet Bucky a year later when he came to the school I was at and gave a lecture in this very small chapel at Lewis and Clark College in Portland, Oregon. Beautiful. So I just feel so blessed to have just been able to shake his hand once in this life. But he became such a primary influence on my awareness about the state of the world, about the potential of how to make the world work for all life, as he would put it, and how to do so through a design revolution, through creating new systems that are in cooperative alignment and harmony with nature rather than otherwise, and to obsolete the ones that are causing challenges. So I read his books. I dove into his synergetic geometry, which is no small task, and I'm not that much of a actually a technical geometer. I'm more of a conceptual one, and but I learned a lot by studying aspects of his work in that. And then I've been immersed in nature through my whole life, and seeing patterns in nature and how they're repeated and how they're geometric and how they're toroidal, and seeing this whole kind of unified picture. I'm also a musician. I've been a musician all my life. So the whole system of music is something I've been aware of, the 12-tone system, the harmonic system of music. And then about 20 years ago, I met both Foster Gamble, who, along with Kimberly Carter Gamble, his wife, created Thrive and Thrive 2. And I met Nassim Haramein, who we just talked about, who has the Resonant Science Foundation and other organizations pursuing what's called unified physics. And both of them were very steeped in Buckminster Fuller's research and knowledge, and also were very steeped in, and Foster was a instructor of Aikido prior to when I met him, but he had studied Aikido very intensely. And they both had a very clear understanding of that toroidal dynamic as being fundamental, and the geometry that Buckminster Fuller had been researching as also fundamental. And when I first saw Nassim lecture about the physics model he was developing, and he was using Bucky's geometry as the foundation for it, I thought, this guy's right. Even though I'm really not a physicist, I love physics. I love the conceptual side, as I said. Um, and
Wow.
so I became friends with them both. I've been a producer through my career of different kinds of media projects. And so when Foster and Kimberly wanted to create, well, actually, one other piece of the puzzle of my background that I guess is not in that bio, from 2000 and I'm sorry, from 1999 to 2004, I was co-director of the Foundation for Conscious Evolution with Barbara Marx Hubbard.
Oh,
And so
wow.
a
I
woman named,
love her.
yeah, and a woman named Teresa Collins was the other co-director. And so in some meetings we had with a small group of people, Foster and Kimberly said, we're going to create a film. That's the thing that we want to do to bring some of this message out.
When was
And
this?
in 2004.
Okay.
And a few years later, they said, okay, we were making a film, and asked me to participate in that and help to produce it. And that was Thrive
Beautiful.
1 that came out in 2011. And then meanwhile, I was living in Hawaii where Nassim was with the Resonance, was called the Resonance Science Foundation at that time. And he asked me to join the board of directors in 2006. And so I've been immersed in both the worlds of the film production side and the theoretical research side in the unified physics, as well as studying the geometry and seeing this whole picture kind of emerge, and then how it relates to the system of music as a harmonic basis for how nature and the cosmos is organizing. And that all came together as a synthesis in my book Cosmometry that you mentioned as well.
Hmm.
So it's been a very eclectic path, non-traditional, non-academic really, but you can't find these subjects in academia yet. We're working on that. But, yeah, it's been very exciting and very rewarding, and I'm thrilled to be able to participate in these kinds of projects.
Wow. Thank you so much. Just hearing you describe that was very inspiring,
Yeah,
and just how just through synchronicitous, meetings and similar interests and interests in different fields leading to this holistic perspective and this outlook um, uh, regarding just what big cosmological questions, existential questions,
mm,
and relating, like you said, your love for nature and seeing certain patterns within nature to larger uh, questions about the state of affairs for ourselves and our world.
mm-hmm.
So wow. So thank you.
My pleasure.
Wonderful. So Marshall also mentioned the film Thrive 1. And so this film's been around since 2011, I believe. Is
That's
that
right.
correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so and you can find this on the Thrive team website, and Marshall's provided me a link. I'll be sure and make it available with the publishing of this video for you all, so you can be sure and check it out. But Thrive 1 is also just a tremendous film with a perspective on just different areas in our society where we have been stalled and stunted. At least this is my perspective from seeing the film like 2 or 3 times, and taking that awareness and recognizing and building structures and systems and a perspective that that unifies everything, unifies human life with the life of our planet, and the cosmos and the galaxies, and a unified perspective on physics and consciousness. And it's just, again, just a wonderful film. So I highly recommend you all to check it out if you haven't seen it. So yeah, so can you tell us more about your book? So Cosmometry, and just tell us a little about um, about, what that is,
Hmm.
because I hear the word cosmos, I hear
Hmm.
geometry,
That's right.
but that's just my initial sense. I'd love to get your direct take, from the author himself as far as what it is, so that our audience can have a better picture.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Yeah, you're right. Cosmic geometry is what that word is concatenated into.
Hmm.
And it's it's for me what I described as my journey and these different pieces of the puzzle coming into a wholeness. Um, it's well, the subtitle is called "Exploring the Holofractal Nature of the Cosmos." Holo is relating to the holographic or hologrammic nature of the cosmos, and then the fractal, which is a repeating pattern at all scales. But they're both aspects of wholeness, and so in a way, it's exploring how the the patterns and dynamics and system relationships that are operating in nature, in ourselves, and in the universe as a whole um, are are repeating, are holistic, are integrated, are unified. And so, how can we describe how that works? That's the essential purpose of that book, and it's a synthesis of some aspects of my study of Buckminster Fuller's geometry, which he called synergetics, um, and then Nassim Haramein's physics, which is called unified physics. And that model, which I said before, is directly related to Fuller's basic geometry. It's a geometry of the 0-point equilibrium state called the vector equilibrium, and then there's other dynamics related to that. And then, as I said, being a musician, understanding the system of music, and then coming to realize that all three of those are really one unified model. And so it's a synthesis of the cosmic geometry, the unified physics, and music, and how they're all one thing, and then how that relates to our experience and how consciousness relates to the physics model, um, which is it's all one. We like to say in the unified physics as we discuss it, and in all aspects consciousness, there's really only one thing going on in the universe, and all the attributes that we use to describe it that appear different, like the fundamental forces of gravity and electromagnetism and the atomic forces that have been thought to be different forces, are really just aspects or attributes of one particular dynamic going on at different scales. And that's true of, the harmonic system of music is directly integral to that one system at all scales. And the attributes of consciousness or intelligence and awareness are also unified throughout the whole system. And when you start taking a perspective that when you start really looking at the nature of things from that perspective, it actually begins, in my mind and in many people's minds, to make more sense than a model where everything's disconnected, it's disparate, hard to find the relationship between the large and the small because there's a big missing piece of information in the current model that makes it pretty much impossible to do that. And so that's really the cosmometry, and that term, which I thought I had made up one day a long time ago. I was looking for a term that was different from sacred geometry, which is a very popular term for aspects of this field of knowledge. And but it turns out cosmometry has been around as a term for a few hundred years, but really not in use.
Wow.
And so it's, for me, the appropriate term for this field of knowledge so that scientists can embrace a geometric model. They're never going to call it sacred geometry, you know.
Right.
And the spiritual community who calls it sacred geometry can have a relationship to the scientific aspect. So yeah, I synthesized many ideas into a whole picture related to those topics and how it all unifies in in a holistic model.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And so for our audience, so you can find Marshall's book on his website. Again, I'll put a link in this video, cosmometry.com. And so there's a direct link where you can purchase his book there. So excellent. Thank you very much. So can you tell us, I mean, I gave my own perspective on the film, on both films, Thrive. But you, as a producer and someone who's been integrally involved in the creation of the films, so can you give us a little bit of background and insight on the films, from your perspective as one of the creators?
Yeah, sure. So Foster Gamble, as I said, has been a friend and colleague for about 20 years, and for at least that long prior to when I met him, he has been studying very much the same kind of core set of inquiry into the geometry, into the torus, fundamental dynamic flow pattern. Ever since I think his teenage years, he's been really in a deep investigation into that. And then the implications of that, especially when you understand the physics aspect of it, how it relates to the reality of there being a unified field that we are immersed in, that we are emerging within as beings, and that field is highly dynamic. It is absolutely filled with energy. Space is not empty. It's very full of energy that is in potential and can be tapped into. And the implications of that are that we live in a vastly abundant universe, vastly abundant. That the notions of scarcity and the ramifications of that kind of a worldview, which get into more kind of a fear-based control and dominance and competition for resources, that whole outcome of that worldview is what we're seeing in the world right now being played out. Whereas understanding that by knowing the basic patterns that nature creates healthy living systems, which in nature is this very coherent, toroidal, dynamic energy. And when you look into it, you realize it's really everywhere at every scale, from atoms to cells to auras and energy patterns around the body and the magnetic field around the earth and the solar system and galaxies. So that's a repeating fractal pattern of wholeness in dynamic relationship and coherent systems. And so Thrive 1 really looks pretty deeply into that aspect, as well as then the implications being, well, if we understand this, and if we hold that it's possible to access energy directly and access attributes of this dynamic that can benefit our ecological systems, our biological systems, and restore wholeness, then why is it not happening? Why don't we have that in the world? And why are, going back to Nikola Tesla and Royal Rife in the early, last century, who did such, profound, groundbreaking work that were then suppressed and shut down. And that's been a repeating pattern for 100 years, that anything based on these ideas where we can actually tap abundance and restore wholeness and have a cooperative, collaborative relationship with ourselves, with the planet, and with the cosmos as a whole, has gone against a certain control agenda, and that really got strongly put in place, about 100 or 150 years ago. That really, especially 100 years ago, certain things were put in place for that to be so. And so the film then goes pretty deeply into that agenda and how it was set up, who set it up, what are the challenges that we're facing. And in Thrive 1, the final part really talks about solutions and solutions based on understanding these fundamental patterns, more conceptual and principle based. And then Thrive 2 takes all that to the next level because after Thrive 1 came out, Foster and Kimberly were contacted by many people around the world who had been innovating technologies in various fields of energy generation or health restoration or agricultural balancing and restoration and consciousness development. And after vetting those down to the ones that were really more actual and doing further vetting to find ones that were really, as they had been stated to be. And also really deeply considering the importance of aligning ourselves in our consciousness, in our worldview, with the same principles operating in nature and in the universe, which are, a decentralized, sovereign-based, unified, individuated and unified cooperative systems. That's what we see in nature and the cosmos. That they decided it was very important to convey that perspective, convey the opportunity we have by understanding the science of the unified field, being able to tap that abundance, using resonance-based technologies for generating energy, for biological health restoration. We are energetic beings in an energetic universe that is filled with energy and life, and it's a shift of worldview and a shift of the way we approach both our technological creation and our societal systems, and very much based on principles such as the primary one being the non-aggression principle, which is the foundation of Aikido. Because Aikido is about non-dissension, non-aggression. It's about receiving energy, blending with it, redirecting it, neutralizing it, and harmonizing it with the universe. And that same principle applies to how would we approach making a shift in our world now. And the principles that are foundational to that are what are also presented in Thrive 2. And so the films are really about, most important, I think, overarching purposes for humanity to get a perspective that we have options that are suppressed, that are not allowed to be so far really promoted, that are transformative, that will obsolete problematic systems and technologies, that will provide what we need to restore our health, to have cures, to have clean energy that's abundant, and in other aspects of our world society, just restore wholeness. And people don't know these options exist in the mass, in the great, much larger field of our human experience here. So the films are really to give people a very grounded and realistic perspective on these kinds of possibilities, and of course, extremely timely at this moment.
So, most definitely.
Yes.
Wow. Yeah, that's very inspiring. I mean, I generally, consider myself someone, in the know as far as, the different, where like our society's headed and steps for our next, stage and evolution. But as I was watching Thrive 2, I was just like, oh, wow, these are very practical, solutions that people have developed. And it was just very inspiring and, for myself, just eye-opening. So I really, again, for those of you watching or listening, highly, highly recommend it. It's just, both films are just so well done, both from a content perspective and the quality and the visuals, which I know that you are very involved with, Marshall. It's just so beautifully done. So,
Thank you.
yeah, sure thing.
Yeah.
Wonderful, great. Um, one of the other things that you touched on that I would love to go into a little bit deeper is you talked about, the 0 point energy field. And we were talking a little bit before, we started our conversation here about how that was an integral aspect of Buckminster Fuller's work. And then you also touched on Nikola Tesla and how his work has been suppressed related to that area. So I was wondering if you could maybe tie those threads and just elaborate a little bit more about that. And just so a little bit of background of where I'm coming from is that, so I come to this conversation and discussion more from from the side of metaphysics and spirituality, and just having that tangible sense of this energy, but it's again, it's metaphysical. It's not scientific in the traditional sense of the word. And from what you're describing and what you've done with the films and your work with the RSF and Buckminster Fuller's work, it sounds like this energy, this profound energy that they're describing is very much a physical reality as well as metaphysical. And so that's my sense, and I would love to have you elaborate on those threads and give us some more insight.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that is correct. We're talking about a very physical reality that the fundamental nature of our world, our experience, the universe as a whole, is that there is a unified field of energy, electromagnetic, light, as well as acoustic sound that is interacting at all scales across the whole field. And I don't want to go too technical into some of the nature of that unified perspective because it would probably take too much time. But as I describe in the book, it's holographic and fractal as a basic way of understanding that wholeness and how that unified field is manifesting what we see as apparently separate things, and yet the unified physics that Nassim is pioneering in a very rigorous and technical manner is showing how the entire system is unified, and that the information of the entire system of the universe and at all scales is present at every point within that system, which is a holographic or hologrammic model. But in terms of your question around the 0 point energy and Buckminster Fuller's work and the importance of understanding that, and even relationship to the metaphysical aspect, it's been known for a long time, and it was a problem in traditional, mainstream physics, that when you calculate the energy potential at any point in space, it basically goes to infinity. And infinities are hard to reconcile in mathematical equations, and so there was a process of basically removing the infinity quantity or quality, shall we say, so that a more contained model of physics could be pursued, starting roughly 100 years ago. And yet that energy potential is very much part of the the mainstream model, but it's in the unified physics, it's restored as fundamental to the nature of the universe in a very physical sense. And it ties to Buckminster Fuller's geometry because he discovered a geometric model wherein all of the lines that connect and create the form of the geometry around the outside, as well as from the center to the points that create it, that define it, are all of equal length. And it's the only geometry where from the center point out and around the outer edges, they're all the same length. And
what is the only geometry where the center point out to all the edges is the
it's called a cube octahedron. And Buckminster Fuller then realized it's what all those lines are called vectors. So from the center out and then connecting all the points around the outside, they're vectors and they're all the same length. So he realized that's an equilibrium state energetically. So he decided that he would call that the vector equilibrium. And there's a whole section on in my book on that geometry. Not only, and it's the geometry of zero, basically, what he called the zero phase. And so that's when all the energy balances out and comes to a rest state. And by understanding that geometry, and then how that geometry goes into dynamic fluctuation, which is what we experience and observe as the physical universe. When you understand the geometric model, you can then, as Nassim has done, use that model in a theoretical framework to do physics. And when that's applied that way, as Nassim has shown in numerous papers, and a very exciting one he's getting ready to publish, showing that across all scales, the model is very true to the energy dynamics that are observable and the mathematical quantities that are defined at different scales. Again, I don't want to get too technical, but the point is that understanding the basic equilibrium geometry model and the dynamic fluctuation that is occurring within that unified field that creates the systems at all scales is proving to be a highly accurate and highly correct model. And as I said, that 0 point field geometry, and it's even in quantum physics, they talk about the quantum foam or the 0 point fluctuations, where as the energy is approaching that 0 point state, there's a highly energetic fluctuation right at that precise kind of phase before it goes into total zero, and it's defined to be extremely they like, I think they use the term violent because it's so charged, really. And so it's a very physical thing, and then the metaphysical aspect is, first of all, understanding that conceptually enables us to bring our own intellectual relationship into alignment with that physical relationship. And then there's the symbolic aspect, which is very familiar in sacred geometry and in metaphysics, which is the flower of life geometry. That is the same equilibrium geometry as what Bucky Fuller discovered. It's a two-dimensional version of what is a three-dimensional, or actually more appropriately, four-dimensional geometry that is the vector equilibrium. And so it's providing us a model that enables us to intellectually understand the unification that we are in a unified system, and then to apply that into our technology and as well inform our worldview, our metaphysical relationship to it, to realize we are unified beings in a unified field, in a unified consciousness, and that the apparent parts and pieces of that are equally unified as they are apparently distinct. And that changes our perception of ourselves, our world, our social systems, really everything that we see, and our way of understanding ourselves and the nature of reality in a very profound way.
Wow. As you were describing that, towards the end of your description there, I feel like something just hit me. It was just like, okay, somewhere I got it.
Yes.
And
that's a great way of describing the experience of what is a fundamental shift in how we think and feel and integrate our mind and our intuition and our physical bodily experience. That is kind of like, wow, something just happened. It's a little bit beyond words or even thoughts, and that's a beautiful expression of that.
Wow. Yeah, well, thank you, because that something happened. So
I know the feeling.
Wonderful. Excellent. Oh, wow. There was another, gosh. So there was another topic that, oh, yes, okay. So with regards to basically what you were just describing with the unified field and Nassim's work, one thing that I heard Foster Gamble say about, and I'm not sure where it was, I think it was in the director's cut of Thrive 1, where I think he said that Nassim's work is to correct and complete the work of Albert Einstein. And that's a very big statement. And Albert Einstein is, in pop culture, in popular mythology, when you think genius, and like when you think of some groundbreaking work in the field of science, he's at the top of the list.
Yeah, true.
And I know it wasn't your statement, but just having worked closely with Foster and Kimberly and Nassim, do you see any truth to that? Is that something that you can touch on? I would love to hear your take on the importance of Nassim's work as it relates to that statement.
Sure. Yeah, and you're right about Einstein being sort of an untouchable, iconic symbol of genius, and sort of no one dares challenge Einstein.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
What arrogance, Well, so one thing is, for all of Einstein's genius and brilliance, in his lifetime and in that scientific era, his theory was incomplete, and he was not able to find that which would unify the quantum, atomic, subatomic world with the cosmological, very large world of gravity and relativity and all that. There was
Is that what he was looking to do? Like when you say his theory was incomplete, so he was looking for this, unified.
Yeah, and that's the unified theory of physics has been sort of a holy grail. There have been attempts at it, and so Einstein did not find that in his lifetime. And Einstein, his perspective, his theory, his model, being incomplete, also had aspects like any and everybody else's. Even though Einstein is held to be the ultimate genius, it doesn't mean he had the whole picture or that his picture was entirely correct. And that's okay. He's a human being. He'd be one of the first to say, I don't have all the answers. And so what Foster is referring to in regards to Nassim's theory is that Nassim has added in attributes, especially the spin dynamic that wasn't within the frame of reference as it's referred to in science and physics, that the model that Einstein's theory is based upon, and the physics model that came out of it was lacking certain aspects that when you apply them into the theory, it doesn't negate the theory at all. It actually completes it, as Foster said, and then in some ways corrects it because it's now more whole and integrated. And that's been, I think, such a big part of the challenge in physics, and which is really fundamentally being addressed through the unified physics model, is that the model developed in the past 100 or so years that's still very predominant in science and academia.
Which model are you referring to?
It's the mainstream physics model, the modern physics model that came from quantum physics and relativistic physics, where there's a disparity there. And as I said, they kind of removed attributes that when you put them back in, it restores that which actually then does unify it. But that model, because it was developed in the way it was, with sort of imposed limitations and boxes that you had to fit within, that model kind of boxed itself in. And so huge questions in physics could not be answered because the model itself would never be able to answer those questions because of its own imposed limitations. And when you remove those limitations and you bring back the field aspect itself and that huge energy potential within it, it all just kind of comes back into play in a way that completes and corrects. And that's what Nassim's theory in over 30 years of developing it, and especially in these more recent years, is really phenomenally accurately showing that restoration of the wholeness and the unification, and it does actually unify the quantum and the cosmological in very elegant and very actually simple ways, and in some aspects that simplicity has been a challenge for the modern physics and academia because they're looking for highly complex, very abstract solutions, and it's been hard for them to accept the simplicity. But the mathematics is proving to be very accurate, and so that's what Foster was referring to, I would say.
Wow, great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Another topic that you were touching on, as you were talking about the 0-point energy field, and we talked about how Nikola Tesla's work was suppressed. So my sense from our conversation is that, Nikola Tesla wanted to develop, and just from my, from seeing, some of the, interviews and the films, that Nikola Tesla was very much interested in free energy. And what part of, so how is that free energy that Nikola Tesla was looking to tap into for everyone? So is that tied to being able to access this 0-point energy field?
It's directly related to the same principles. Okay. And so the premise that there's a unified field of energy, first of all, opens up ways in which to consider accessing that field of energy rather than combusting petroleum-based products, to create energy, burn them, or, to have nuclear fission and all just to boil water. You know, I mean, come on. That's very based on exploding and breaking apart dynamics, which releases a lot of energy, of course.
And it's very destructive.
And it's extremely destructive just by its very nature. It's destroying, you know, chemical compounds and atomic structures in order to generate energy. So the reverse of that is to come into a resonance relationship with that field that is still in a very dynamic relationship, and yet it's not bursting apart and exploding. It's actually integrating and imploding to bring energy into our physical world based on these field dynamics. And Tesla was exploring an aspect of the Earth's dynamic energy flows in what's called a xenic wave. It's a particular kind of an energetic movement around the surface of the Earth that a man named Zdeněk had discovered, and Tesla was building his Wardenclyffe Tower to tap into that, and then being able to transmit energy wirelessly anywhere around the world in a safe manner, which would then make it basically free, you know. And it's a lot of people have difficulty with the idea of free energy because of the laws of thermodynamics, but you realize it's energy that's present and available. It's a different approach to tapping energy, so it's not violating any physical laws, and yet it's constantly there, therefore continuously renewed and so-called then free. And then, of course, he got shut down by JP Morgan, his investor at the time, because, you know, you can't meter and charge for free energy. And but that's what Tesla was working with. And when you watch Thrive 2, you'll see that there are a couple of brothers, the Coram brothers, who have in recent years been developing that same technology, re-engineering it, and from what Foster's research has come to find out is that it's pretty much there, it's done, it's ready to go. And so, you know, 100 or so years later, we're looking at getting to where we could have been 100 years ago.
100 years ago, right.
And imagine if we had that over the past 100 years, bypassing all of this internal combustion engine technology, coal and you know, oil burning power plants and nuclear and all of that. All that pollution, all that damage could have been avoided. And so the good news is that it looks like that same kind of technology that can be wirelessly transmitted without detriment, because of the nature of how it's you know, the engineering of that does exist and is poised to be brought into our world. And there are numerous other kinds of inventions. Another one that's showcased in the film by this wonderful man in Africa.
I loved the story there. That was,
yeah, it's a great story.
Exciting, yeah.
And these things are, you know, these things exist and are ready to come into our world. And we're still facing some of the same hurdles that Tesla and many others have faced in the past 100 years. So yeah, it's very much about understanding that unified field, the dynamics of how energy is moving, and then different ways in which you can tap into that energy source. So
wonderful, great. Thank you so much for that.
Mm-hmm.
Great, yeah. Well, Marshall, it's been wonderful speaking with you, and such an honor and such a blessing, and it's been so insightful and inspiring. And so I really, really want to thank you for your time and your energy and your insight and just all the great work that you've done. Do you have any final words that you'd like to leave our audience with, before we bring our conversation to an end?
Sure. Thank you again for having me in this conversation today, Sohail, and I appreciate your deep inquiry into this. Yeah, and I think what's for me most important is that that our beautiful human family here around the world, which is in such a turmoil and faced with such layers of crises, we're really at a turning point, and we don't know which direction that's going to go. There are some very dangerous aspects of that in terms of not only the ecological, systemic kinds of crises, but as well the societal ones that are, imposing ever more challenging control, domination, surveillance, sort of leading towards at least a world that I'm not that interested in creating as a fundamental reality.
Me neither.
Yeah, and that we, as we've just been talking about, we have options that enable us to go in an entirely different, collaborative, cooperative, harmonious with ourselves, harmonious with nature, resonance-based, understanding everything is energy. When we come into a harmonic resonance relationship with nature and the cosmos, we restore wholeness in our world, in our consciousness, in our emotions, in our bodies, in our relationship to each other, in our relationship to the natural world. We have full capacity, understanding, knowledge, and well, so we have that capacity, understanding, knowledge to do that. What we are faced with is the choice to act on that opportunity. And we can only really do so when people know that that choice exists. And that's why these films are so important. The Resonance Science Foundation, this is very grounded, very rigorous physics that shows this to be true. It's a scientifically foundational model that then integrates our mind with what we've known in our hearts and in our spirits and in our metaphysical understanding for millennia. This unified state of being, this spiritual wholeness. Now we have a physical model that is integral with that. And we can choose to apply that into our world and choose to do so from a place that's principle-based, that's in harmony with that same dynamic in the universe. And so the most important thing is to be aware of it, to share it widely through sharing the films and the Resonance Science Foundation. As we were talking about before we came on, we have a complete online course that's free in the unified physics. So if you're, and most people in it are not scientists, and it's written for people who are not scientists.
Excellent. Yeah, that's really a great point.
And my book is the same way. I wrote it for people who are not scientific. This is, to me, the most important aspect of the time we're in and the awareness that we need to engender in the world and the choices we have to make informed by this worldview, this unified worldview. And it's time to do it now because we're at a critical threshold in many ways. So that's I know you're here for. We talked about that at the beginning as well. We're here for that. That's the place we stand, and that's the world we're creating together.
Wonderful.
May it be so now.
Thank you so much, Marshall. Thank you for all your wisdom. And again, everyone, I'll post the links to Marshall's book, the Thrive films, the Resonance Science Foundation in the description of this interview. And thank you all so much for joining us. It's truly been a pleasure and an honor.
Likewise for me as well. Thank you, Sahil.